Welcome to the Expansive Astrology Podcast, where we look at using astrology beyond the tropes and horoscopes to tune into the natural forces around us and within us, honoring our true nature to craft our future. I'm your host, Melissa, the self-care-witch, and I'm here to help you meet your magic. Without further ado, let's begin this week's episode with a tarot reading for the collective. Welcome back. So glad to have you. It's episode 9. Today we're talking about how we defend ourselves. We're talking about our crab shell and our pinchers. But first things first, let's see what the cards have for us today. Remember, this is a reading for the collective, so take what you need and leave the rest. Stay open to seeing how this might play out for you or unfold for you over the coming week. Oh, geez. Okay. So let's see where this takes us. We have some contracted energy. It's not quite as sweet of a spread as I've gotten the past couple of weeks. And that makes sense. That fits. It makes sense. Who's surprised? What's present for us is the 7 of Wands supported by the Magician. Now, in the Pamela Coleman Smith illustration, we see a being who is putting up a fight. They've got this wand. They look distressed, and they're seemingly like beating off 6 other wands that seem to be the person is obviously like threatened by these 6 other wands. Now, as always, I love the soul tarot approach to this card where the reality is we don't know what is going on with these 6 other wands. The reality is we don't know how defended this being actually needs to be. So the 7 of Wands is like this check-in with hyper-vigilance. It's this check-in with areas of our life where we feel like we have to be defended and protective. And when we pull the 7 of Wands, we're just checking in with that. We're just checking in with those things. I think part of the medicine of checking in with that is realizing that we will know when we need to defend ourselves. And this is so interesting. It's so interesting that the 7 of Wands came up as what's present for us. And then, just to skip ahead a little bit, the 5 of Wands came up as the lesson. And today we're talking about how we defend ourselves, it just fits. This tarot fits with the expansive astrology content I'm going to get into later in this episode. It's kind of wild, but part of the medicine of the 7 of Wands is realizing that we will know when we need to pick up our wand and, use our fire. We don't need to stay hyper-vigilant and defended 24/7. You will know when you're unsafe. So many of us are so hyper-vigilant all of the time. And many of us come from, like we have to be that way. We have to be ready to protect ourselves, defend ourselves, uh depending on our current circumstances or our past circumstances, right? But no matter what the circumstances, the 7 of Wands just wants us to be mindful of how we're using our fire, just being mindful. How protective do you need to be? Can you find pockets of time, areas of time, moments where you don't have to be so defended and so tense? remembering that we can only ever be in fight or flight or rest and digest. And when we're stuck in a Seven of Wands experience, there's no rest and digest about it. We're constantly ready for a fight. We're constantly ready to use our fire for a fight. And there is a time and a place for that, right? Obviously, of course. Of course. That's why we have fire. That's why we have wands. Sometimes we do need to use that fire in a very defensive way. But again, when we're stuck in this space, it becomes unhealthy. Like, seriously, the effect that hypervigilance has on the body is it can't be understated. It contributes to so many health problems. So this isn't about unarming ourselves. This isn't about taking away protective measures. It's about checking in with our hypervigilance and learning when to pick up the wand and how to use it, depending on certain times, like making sure. And it is blowing my mind because we're going to talk about this later in this episode. But knowing when to use our pinchers, knowing when to use our shell, our protective shell, knowing when and why we're showing up in a defensive way. The difference between defending ourselves and being defensive, all things that we're wanting to explore. And of course, the Seven of Wands comes up for the collective. Of course, we're feeling threatened, hypervigilant, afraid. Like, of course we are. Of course we are. So it's not about not feeling those things, and it's not about not using our fire. It's not about disarming ourselves. It is about appropriately arming ourselves, right? It's about appropriately using our fire, appropriately engaging with our defenses. And this is supported by the Magician. Thank goodness for that. The Magician reminds us of our power, to put it really plainly. The Magician reminds us of our power. There's also the Magician is ruled by Mercury. It's ruled by Gemini. So big invitations anytime we pull the Magician to tend to our channel, our nervous system, making sure our channel is open. And I've heard some people speaking about how the current state of affairs in America has us like really activated in the root. We're feeling really threatened in the womb and the root, collectively. And if you, sweet soul, are feeling tense or fatigued in your hips or in your feet, I for one am feeling that. My feet have been a little swollen and really sore. And there are times where I feel really disconnected from like the whole bottom half of my body. Those are signals of like blockages in the root, this just like disruption in the root, trouble in the root. Whether or not that's happening for you, the Magician is here and reminds us to stay open through our whole channel, really tending to our channel. And I like looking at the like chakra system as a way to like conceptualize that and inspire, movement and tending to all parts of my channel, from the head, from the crown to the root. The Magician also asks us how we're using our hands. How are we engaging with our materials, with the resources that are in front of us? How can you create change with what is in front of you? The Magician asks us how we like engage with what comes through us. It's like the process of experiencing something external, running it through our channel and like interpreting it and then alchemizing it into something that then comes through us again. Are you honoring divine inspiration? Are you acting on an inkling? Are you trusting your magic? Are you using your hands and your connection and the resources in front of you to create change in your world? What's present for us is an invitation to check in with how we're using our wands, how we're using our fire, check in with our hyper-vigilance. And that's supported by a reminder that you are a magician. You have a connection. You have a channel. You have resources. You can craft and create change in your world, in your own little world. And don't, it can be really overwhelming to think of all of the change that is needed, the change that we need and probably want to affect in the world. It can start to feel really overwhelming and, frankly, hopeless to see how much is out of our little hands. And the magician is reminding us not to lose connection with our inner magician. Don't lose hope, love. Don't lose hope. The lesson of the week, 5 of Wands, is that question. Any 5 card is like contraction. It's usually not too pretty. And in the 5 of Wands, we just get to consider and ask how we show up to conflict. How do you engage in conflict? This is another one that I'm surprised came up because later in the episode, we're going to be talking about the importance of conflict. Yeesh. So many people avoid conflict. Of course we do. Of course we do. But actually engaging in conflict is an act of self-love and self-respect. Sometimes, right? There's a boundary and a balance. I think you know that. But the 5 of Wands, how do you show up to the conflict? How willing are you to engage in the conflict? Any 5 is kind of that moment where we're setting up a tent and all of the tarps and the rainfly and the stick pole thingies and the stakes, it's all all over the place. It's the chaos before the tent is pitched. It's in the process of cleaning out your closet, it's that moment where it looks like your closet threw up on your bed and it's like complete chaos and it's a mess. It's that moment before everything gets put back together. So the 5 of Wands is a necessary part of life, right? The closet wouldn't get cleaned if there wasn't that piece of it. And that piece of it is, I think, why we neglect to clean the closet, because it's a pain in the ass to move through that. We don't typically invite, like a 5 of Wands energy or 5 of Wands experience. It's usually something that it's like a necessary evil, for lack of a better term. But as a lesson, we're considering, how do you show up to that? Can you show up in your power? Can you show up gracefully to conflict? How do you use your power in conflict? How do you use your fire? And that lesson is helping us connect with our inner magician and helping us cope with a 7 of Wands experience with more ease. We can't bypass 5s. We can't bypass the 5 of Wands, but we can empower ourselves in those moments, in those conflicts. And so, what do we do with all of this? What is our anchor for the week? The Hermit. So, the Hermit, similar to like the High Priestess, invites us into a state of being rather than doing. It's a quiet energy. Sometimes we pull the Hermit and really need to take an invitation to turn inward, isolate, kind of to block out outside influence, outside voices. So if that feels like something that you need to do, take that invitation. And that's not always true. I don't think that's always necessary when we pull the Hermit. I don't think like every time the Hermit comes up, I don't think it's necessarily like a call to isolate. But I do think it's a call to turn inward and focus, zoom in and focus on just what is right in front of you. What is being illuminated to you? And interesting that in the Hermit, the Hermit is ruled by Virgo, I believe. Uh, so that's an earth sign, but the Hermit is holding a lantern with a light, so that's fire, and they're holding a big old staff, a big old wand. So that's fire. And the magician, of course, has a wand on his table. So all of our cards are in some way inviting us to engage with our fire, with our power. Fire is power, passion, motivation. Sometimes it's anger, but it's like more than that, like passion. Our inner flame, our inner knowing, what motivates us, what our get up and go, how we affect change in the world. So the Hermit has so much fire, and the Hermit is a state of being with that fire and listening to that fire. The Hermit is just focused on what they can see with their little lantern, nothing more. So there's an invitation with the Hermit to center back in and make sure that, we can get so caught up in what we don't have or what we don't know, or, we're fear about what's to come, all sorts of things. All sorts of things, right? But that distract us or that bring our mind away from what is right in front of us. The Hermit is an invitation to center in with what is right in front of you. What is being illuminated to you right now? What is in your, line of sight? What is in your what is like being enlightened, illuminated to you right now? And center in with that. Start from there. That's all we can ever really be with anyway. Otherwise, anything else is just like in our mind. It's like an illusion in our head. All we can truly be with is what's right in front of us, what's being illuminated to us. And that's our anchor for the week. So, overall, this pull is really a pretty clear invitation for us to be with our fire and manage it. Show up to conflicts gracefully and make sure we're managing hyper-vigilance. Make sure we're empowering ourselves, but not getting too carried away, or kind of staying in our lane, keeping our eyes on our own paper. There might be some kind of intense energy this week. These cards aren't necessarily fortune telling conflict and trouble. Not necessarily. I'd say they're more so reminding us that we can empower ourselves if conflict or trouble arises. So hopefully it won't be too intense of a week. But we're always given opportunities to empower ourselves. So anytime, practice this for the next week. Since our lesson is the 5 of Wands, practice anytime you sense a conflict or you become aware that there's like this 5 of Wands conflict energy happening. See if you can anchor in with the Magician and the Hermit. See if you can view any conflicts as an opportunity for you to strengthen your inner Hermit, for you to strengthen your inner Magician. For the next week, any conflict, rather than being a problem, see if you can look at it as an opportunity. I know that's kind of a lot to ask. But when we can practice doing that, then each conflict it is an opportunity. It becomes an opportunity for us to show up more easily, to show up more gracefully, to show up in our power. Any conflict is an opportunity for us to learn our fire a little more, you know? Conflicts are an opportunity for us to practice using our fire, to practice defending ourselves, to learn what works and what doesn't in defending ourselves. And I have to say, my favorite deck is my Smith Rider-Waite deck. And lately, I've been using a new deck by a local artist here in town called the Tarot of Transcendence. And it is so lovely. It makes a pull like this, which is a little more intense. It lands a little more softly than some decks. So if you are needing a really, gentle, lovely deck to learn on, I highly recommend the Tarot of Transcendence deck. I can't recommend it enough, actually. It's been so lovely to befriend over the past couple of weeks. So that's all we have for the collective tarot reading. May the odds be ever in your favor. Like I said, hopefully it doesn't hopefully this doesn't mean it's gonna be a intense week, but I mean, we'll see. Now, let's see what the Expansive Astrology has for us this week. Last week, we dove within. We dove in deep. And this week, we're discussing the other side of Cancer's medicine, the shell. Cancer's incredible ability to cultivate a sense of home and cultivate nurturing means that it knows how to defend itself. The mother archetype is dubbed Mama Bear because it is so fiercely protective of that which it loves. After diving into the shell last week and working on developing a nurturing, loving, knowing, intimate relationship with your deepest, most private self, now we're looking at how you protect that self, your defense mechanisms. But first, a quick discussion on values, on what it is that is important to you. Cancer's gift of creating home inspires us to look at what is home for you. What gives you a sense of home? What gives you a sense of safety? What do you value? Many counselors will begin to get to know you with an evaluation of your values because it tells us a lot. It's important. It's helpful to review what you value every now and again. Because just like our emotions, which we spoke about last week, just like our emotions, our values serve as a sort of roadmap. They guide us on how to navigate difficult situations. They're like little anchors to dig in with before proceeding. And I've set up Expansive Astrology so that we review our values like almost every other month-ish. Like Taurus has invitations to evaluate our values with the Hierophant, Cancer with its ability to create a home base, Virgo because Virgo is all about like serving. Libra, of course, is about balance and justice, and then like Aquarius brings invitations about what we value and the medicine we're bringing to the world. So you can see how important I think it is to check in frequently because they change frequently depending on just what's happening in our lives. But checking in, so I want you to do that this week. What do you value right now? What are like your top 4 to 6 values that are really present for you right now that you would like to be more present for you? You can, you know, just kind of reflect on it and write down a list of 5 or 6, 4 I think like 4 to 6, a handful, is usually a good number to center in with. But you can kind of just sense in with what themes are important in your life right now, or you can Google a list of values. Google like a values exercise, and I'm sure there are endless options, but what is most important to you right now? Because that helps illuminate what activates your defenses, your defense mechanisms, right? And also, kind of along with that, the same but different. I want you to consider what gives you a sense of home. What makes you feel at home? What is important for you in a sense of home? And I asked on my Instagram, and here's what you had to say. Calmness. When my soul is at peace, I am my home. I am my first priority. The sun. Sitting in a kitchen with lots of natural sunlight. Conversations that never end, that everyone involved is invested in, that are filled with personal history. Whether or not I can comfort to my fullest potential in a space. Untouched nature. I love these answers. And something that I see in common is, I think that phrase untouched nature is really lovely. A lot of some of you mentioned the sun and natural light, intimacy and calmness, acceptance. And there's like a common thread of rawness, like an ability to be raw, an ability to be full and whole and natural. What do you value? What makes you feel at home? Know these things so that you can know what activates your defenses. There are so many ways that we can defend ourselves, so many things that we learn, so many things we pick up along the way. Cancer, being the crab, inspires this idea of the shell and the pinchers, which are two different ways to defend ourselves, right? We can use our shell to hide or to protect ourselves from predators, or and that's kind of a more passive way of protecting ourselves, or we can use our pinchers in a more aggressive way of protecting ourselves, right? It's not just aggressiveness. It's not just the pinchers that are defending or defensive, right? It's not just about like whether or not we're being aggressive. It's not just about being an asshole. There's also, it can be really protective if we're being overly sweet. If we're being passive, that can be a protective measure. Right? We do all sorts of things to defend ourselves. And in fact, from like an evolutionary point of view, we actually won't engage in anything that we on some level feel is supportive or helpful or protective of us. Why would we? How do you protect yourself? How do you defend yourself? So like for example, if you have a great fear of abandonment, that might feel very vulnerable, right? Which may lead to desperate attempts to feel accepted, to feel like you're not going to be abandoned by your partner. And so that need for acceptance is coming from a very vulnerable human place, but it might come out in really disempowered, uncute, unhelpful ways, like lashing out or picking fights, because that serves a purpose, because once the fight is resolved, you feel at ease and accepted again. Resolving the fight on some level, even though no one likes fighting, resolving the fight feels good. So on some level, If we don't keep this in check, a person might be engaging in arguments as a way of protecting themselves from their fear that they're going to be left, from the fear that the partnership is over or ending. So this week we're really looking at how you protect yourself, especially when something important to you seems to be or feels to be at risk in some way. How do you show up to those moments? How do you protect yourself? Let's start exploring your defenses, because there is a difference between defensiveness and defending yourself. There's a difference between being defensive and defending yourself. When we're defensive, we're expecting a fight. The dictionary.com definition says that to be defensive is to be excessively concerned with guarding against the real or imagined threat of criticism, injury to one's ego, or exposure of one's shortcomings. So when we're defensive, there's that hyper-vigilance. There's that expectation that we're going to have to guard ourselves against a real or imagined threat. Like, there doesn't even have to be anything actually happening. And that's kind of where that Seven of Wands medicine comes in. To be defensive is to be excessively concerned with guarding against the real or imagined threat of criticism, injury to one's ego, or exposure of one's shortcomings. Like, nothing about that is empowered. Nothing about it. Nothing about that is empowered. But defending, on the other hand, defending is responding. So the definition of defending is to support in the face of criticism, to prove the validity of by answering arguments and questions. So when we're defending ourselves, we're responding, we're answering arguments, we're answering questions, we're supporting what's important to us in the face of arguments or doubt. And we can learn how to defend ourselves. That's empowered. We can learn to do that in a very empowered way. And so much of our defensiveness comes from insecurity, hypervigilance, past trauma. Defensiveness comes from sensing imagined threats and attacking preemptively. And this is different from defending. This is different from responding. And it's different from confrontation. How do you show up to confrontation? How do you respond to confrontation? How do you initiate a confrontation? Most of the people I work with don't do well with confrontation. And that's good. Like, that comes from such a sweet place. We don't want to be confrontational. That can be such a sweet thing, It comes from a good place. But it's a necessary part of life, and confrontation is self-love. Confrontation is self-respect. It's a necessary aspect of loving yourself, and it builds more self-love. We can engage in confrontation in an empowered way, in a gentle way, Now, usually when a confrontation is happening, there's a lot of ego involved. It's only natural, so it's really difficult. It's really difficult. But this is all a piece of this season's medicine. This is all a piece of Cancer's gifts, is its ability to fiercely love and nurture and protect. And that sometimes requires defensiveness, it sometimes requires confrontation. On the other hand, sometimes we utilize our shell to avoid defending ourselves, to avoid confrontation. Our shell is necessary to protect against predators. So we just have to ask, why are you going into your shell? Why? What is happening? Because sometimes it is totally appropriate and completely okay. It's never a problem unless or until it's a problem. Okay. But just asking yourself, what are you protecting? Are you avoiding confrontation because it isn't safe for you? Perfect. That's what the shell is for. Sounds like you were employing your inner advocate or your inner empowered mother to protect yourself. And, you know, as long as you're using discretion and discernment to learn what is and is not safe for you to engage in, perfect. Perfect utilization of the shell that you have been given, little crab. On the other hand, are you being overprotective of yourself? Maybe explore that. See if it is safe. See if you can safely push the edge of your comfort. Maybe practice with staying out of your shell. It's never about putting yourself at risk. It's never about disarming yourself completely. And if it does feel safe, can you push against the edges of your comfort and disarm yourself or come out of your shell a little bit? Are you retreating into your shell because you're being overprotective of someone other than yourself? It's important to explore that. Why? Where is that coming from? Again, it's not a problem unless or until it's a problem. But why? Why are you feeling overprotective of somebody who is not you or somebody who is not your literal child? Are you taking on work that isn't yours? Are you retreating into your shell to protect somebody who isn't you? Are you hiding pieces of yourself to try to protect somebody who it's not your job to protect? This happens in a lot of ways. At this last week's moon meetup, a beautiful, wonderful soul was speaking about how she hides herself from her mother because she doesn't want to disappoint her mother. So she's hiding a big piece of her truth because she doesn't want to disappoint her mother. And there are kind of two sides to it. There's the part of her who is hiding because she knows her mother won't accept this piece of her. And so that's protective, right? She doesn't want to experience rejection from her mother. So she's keeping this piece of herself hidden and tucked away within her shell to protect against that rejection. And that makes sense. However, the part of her that is hiding this important piece of her away in her shell because she doesn't want to potentially cause her mom any pain. She's hiding an important truth about herself to protect somebody else's feelings, which is noble. And it's not necessarily a problem. I mean, to say it like for the third or fourth time, it's not a problem until or unless it's a problem. It's perfectly okay for her to utilize her shell in that way, for her to want to protect her mom in that way. I think it's so important though to know that that's the motivation, to know that that's where it's coming from. And remembering that, like, I'm sure it's Brene Brown who says that secrets breed shame. The things that we keep in our shell, are we keeping them there to protect ourselves? Or are we keeping them there because we're ashamed of them? Are we keeping them there because other people won't be able to handle them? Will be rejected? Do what you need to protect yourself. That's why you have a shell. I don't I'm not meaning to say we shouldn't use our shell in that way or that we shouldn't try to protect the people that we love. But evaluating, just being really careful in evaluating, like, is any of this coming from shame? Is any of this coming from a sense of responsibility that is undue, that isn't fair to us? Are we hiding a piece of ourselves that would benefit from seeing the light of day, that other people would benefit from seeing in the light of day. Just a lot of things to think about. Are our protective measures coming from a true need to protect? Or are they coming from brain contraction, ego defenses, patriarchal disconnection, oppression, shame, lack of self-worth, right? Just things to be aware of, things to pay attention to. We want to be aware of the tendency to become withdrawn, to disconnect, to be non-confrontational, really evaluating and being aware of our hesitation to open up and be vulnerable, our hesitation to let people see our meaty insides. Cancer also has a tendency to give up or compromise. There's this people-pleasing tendency because it is so nurturing and homey and giving and watery and wonderful. But remember the dam. The more we try to constrict or restrict, the more we close ourselves off, the more we don't allow our water to flow. When we compromise ourselves, when we refuse to engage in healthy, appropriate confrontation, when we tend toward passivity or passive aggressiveness instead of assertiveness or confrontation, it's when we're being dangerous with our water. It's not empowered, it's not effective use of our water. Cancer is inviting us into empowered and effective use of our water and empowered and effective use of our shell. Remembering that our water, or what comes up with our water, our emotions and our intuition, are our roadmap on how we communicate, on how we craft our world, on how we get our needs met. This is why knowing and loving the inner crab is so, so important, so that we can accurately use our emotions as guideposts, so that we know how to read that roadmap. And the more we practice with our water, the more we practice with emotional intelligence, the more we practice with being emotional beings with others, the more we learn what our emotions mean. So things like when I'm feeling blank, it means blank. So when you're feeling angry, it might mean that a boundary is being crossed. They say anger is the voice of the unheard. And so many are afraid to tap in with their anger because it feels so powerful. It feels like once we tap in with our anger, it'll take us away. It'll never end. We feel maybe dangerous with our anger. It feels too forceful or too much. And it's important to listen to our anger. It's important to tap in with our anger and use our anger and listen to what it's trying to say. It usually means that some sort of boundary is being crossed, that something that we're passionate about or something that is important to us is feeling threatened or disrespected. And when we know that, when we're aware of that, we can do something with that, right? Anger is kind of hard to work with, but when you understand where it's coming from and what it's trying to tell you, that gives you something to do with it, right? Or when you're feeling hopeless, it might mean that you're needing to reconnect with the people that you love. Be reminded of your worth. When you're feeling frustrated, maybe it means you need to take a break or delegate, get an outside opinion. When you're feeling just taken advantage of, maybe it means you need to set a boundary or ask for more help. Feelings are data, they're messengers, and they can help us express ourselves and get our needs met. When we're talking about our defenses, In the crab shell, there's one more important thing to note, and it is how we approach confrontation or how we approach any situation, really. If we're coming at a situation with our pinchers out, if we're coming at a situation like clearly walled off, clearly within our shell, it's likely that we'll be met in the same way. If we're approaching a situation and it's clear that we have our sword and our sword drawn and our shield at the ready or whatever, then of course the other person is gonna, pull their sword out and put up their shield too. Gemini helps us learn what is happening within our nervous system, what is happening within our channel. Cancer helps us learn how we defend that. And then we step into Leo next season, where we really engage with that exchange between vulnerability and courage. So Cancer season sets a foundation for that, for practicing vulnerability, practicing showing up to situations fleshy and meaty, outside of our shell, pinchers down, knowing that we can always set a boundary, defend ourselves, disengage. We can always tend to whatever comes up. But if what you want is vulnerability and authenticity and softness and tenderness and love and acceptance and comfort and home, if those are the things that you want, empower yourself to show up in that energy too. Empower yourself to show up meaty and soft and vulnerable. And you're more likely to be met the same way. It's not foolproof. It's not guaranteed. Unfortunately, totally wish it was. You can show up as soft and vulnerable and empowered as you absolutely possibly can. And it definitely does not guarantee that the world will match that energy. Certainly not a guarantee. But the likelihood definitely increases. For sure. And that's all I have for you for the Expansive Astrology this week. Let's do a brief astrological forecast. Today, Mars enters Taurus, so it leaves its home of Aries. Mars loves Aries, and it's entering into Taurus. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out for us. Mercury enters Cancer, which might give our communication and the way we connect with each other a bit of a Cancerian flair. That sounds lovely, huh? And then the moon is void of course today, Tuesday the 5th, from 2:04 until it enters Libra at 6:25. That's Eastern Daylight Time. And just a refresher from last week, when the moon is void of course, that means it is between signs. So some say it's a good time to rest and reflect and do kind of more passive self-care type things rather than trying to start something new or get something done. Now, I don't think you need to necessarily follow this very strictly, but it's just interesting to kind of tune in with and pay attention to. And if nothing else, can you use the moon being void as an excuse for you to do something a little soft and gentle with yourself, for you to kind of, I don't know, it's almost like siesta vibes in some ways. The whole world and in some cultures, the whole community shuts down for rest at certain times. uh can we kind of look at the moon being void of course in the same way? I don't know. I mean, we're all hella busy, but I think it's a mindset shift. Anyway, so the moon is void, of course, today, this afternoon from about 2:04 until 6:25, but that's Eastern Daylight Time. Wednesday the 6th, we have a waning half moon in Libra. And then the moon is void, of course, on the 7th from 9:04 until it enters Scorpio on the 8th at 1:15 early in the morning. It goes void, of course, again Sunday the 10th at 12:34 until it enters Sagittarius at 4:34 in the morning of the 11th. And then it's void again on Monday the 11th from 9:42 in the evening until it enters Capricorn at 5:01 in the morning on the 12th. So again, I'm totally open to hearing feedback on if that is useful for you. Do you like knowing when the moon is void, of course, or is it kind of just me listing a whole bunch of dates and times for no reason? I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to let me know. Otherwise, that's all I have for you this week. I can't thank you enough for being here. Next week, we'll wrap up Cancer season. We'll chat about the Chariot and the Queen of Cups, and we will begin to explore the invitations of Leo. So I'm really looking forward to that. Until next time, take care. Bye. Now, before you go, let me keep your ear for just a moment. This week's episode is brought to you by www.theselfcarewitch.com, my bread and butter, where you can find more information on my current courses, offerings, and other fun ways to connect with myself and yourself. If you enjoyed this episode and you dig what I'm doing here, please subscribe to the podcast, rate it, and leave a review. It helps so much. And if you'd like to connect with me, head to theselfcarewitch.com. I'd truly love to hear from you. Until next time, take care.